We have plenty of people at this university who do identify with their religious faith, with their beliefs, and that includes Christians, right? Whether that's Catholics, whether that's Orthodox, whether that's evangelicals. And so considering that usually universities are probably more progressive leaning, I feel like we deserve some sort of representation to get on that. What I'm rather suggesting is for me to be a representative for them.
What is your name and what are your pronouns?
My name is Lachlan Mansour. My pronouns are he, him.
What degree are you doing and what year are you in?
I am doing a Bachelor of Politics, Philosophy and Economics, the new degree at USU, and I am currently in my first year.
Wow.
So, newbie.
What is your campaign slogan?
My campaign slogan is, let's make USU for you. Bit of poetry there.
Who is your campaign manager?
I am my campaign manager.
How come?
I don't know, I probably have to pay them, and I'd rather just do it all myself because I can do video editing and I think it'll just be less complicated. So, I mean, look, if I was running as if I was running for MP, maybe that's a different story, but it's just USU election. So it's not a large scale, so it should be all right.
Yeah. What is your campaign colour?
My campaign colour, there's a bit of confusion over this, but if I do remember correctly, I think it was either some sort of shade of yellow or orange actually, but.
Okay. Do you know the hex code?
The hex code? No, I haven't memorized the hex code. Oh my goodness.
What is your faction?
I have no faction. I am my faction.
Are you currently or formerly a member of a political party?
Oh, look, formally I am a member of Family First. The reason being is because personally I don't align with any of the major parties, primarily because I am economically in the center, so I might align with a lot of what the major parties say on the economic policies. Socially, though, I'm more conservative, so I don't really align with any of the major parties on their social stance, so hence why I'm a part of them. And a lot of that in the social part is primarily due because of the fact I am Eastern Orthodox, so that does affect the way well, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, it does shape the way I look at those issues.
Can you explain more why you like Family First specifically, like as a party?
Oh, look, because a lot of the other minor parties on the right in Australia, I am very suspicious of and very distrustful of. That is, Trumpets and Patriots, One Nation, primarily because of their perhaps other policies, whether that's environmental, whether that's social policies or economic policies. I'm very suspicious of them. Whilst I think Family First takes a more of a moderated stance, whilst also maintaining that social conservatism as well.
What is your stance on USU incorporation, both incorporation as a substantive matter and the intended change to governance at the SGM?
Oh, look, I have no opinion on that. Look, primarily because I haven't actually looked into what the AGM was concerned with, probably because my mind has just been so preoccupied with a lot of other things that have been going on at the moment. Just sort of adjusting to university life, I suppose, and just trying to balance everything else in my life too. So I haven't really had much time to look into it. So I can't really give much of an opinion on it. If I were to give an opinion on it, it would be very, very much of a guess, and I think it would be very uneducated.
Right, now we're moving on to clubs and societies.
No worries.
So what involvement have you had in clubs and societies?
Oh my goodness, this is going to be a first year moment. Okay, so just to go back to Open Week, I just signed up to a crazy amount of societies. Currently I am a member of, well, technically I'm a member of a number of societies, but the ones that I'm primarily concerned with getting more involved in is the Orthodox Society, the Conservative Club, because of the political leanings I have. Hence why I'm not a part of the Labour Club or the Liberal Club. Oh, I think I am a part of the Liberal Club, but that was when I had more liberal leanings, and now not so much. But of course, I suppose in that respect, I haven't really gotten involved in the administration of them, obviously because I'm the first year. Sorry, I forgot to mention also, I'm also part of the Lebanese Society and also the Greek Society too. Got to respect both heritages, right? Of course, yeah. You have to. There's so much rich history there and culture. But yeah, look, honestly, getting involved in a few events here and there, and honestly, nothing too much else aside from that. Again, I'm only in my first year.
Well, our next question was, have you had any executive roles in clubs, societies, or other student bodies?
Okay, look, on the university level, no. Once again, because I'm only in my first year. Yeah. I did try to run for the Greek Society, but that wasn't very successful. Probably because I didn't have the connections, and I don't know many people there anyway. But I did go to St. Euphemia College throughout pretty much my whole schooling life, from kindergarten to year 12. And I was actually the SRC representative for year 11, and also I was the school captain for year 12 as well. Okay. So I do have some experience in student administration, trying to work with the school itself and trying to organize events. So I do have a bit of experience in that, but on the university level, no. But I'm more than willing to learn along the way too, and learn from my peers.
We're just going to move on to the USU portion.
Yeah, sure.
So, every year, almost every candidate speaks about better, cheaper, and more food. How do you propose the USU do such a thing?
Look, how's a very difficult question. I suppose, look, I don't know all the facts and figures of the revenue of the USU and the expenses and everything. That's something I think that will come in due time. I suppose it's evaluating that income and expenditure and just doing some basic household management in the sense of how much revenue would be taken away from the USU if we were to reduce prices. And that is, in fact, one of my policies, to reduce prices at USU venues, if possible, because we are living in a cost of living crisis. More on that later. And sort of comparing that to our expenses and whether we are making a loss, because we do need to make some gain. We do need to direct revenue towards our initiatives, and if we are not making enough revenue, then it's unsustainable, right? So there might not be anything inherently wrong with price increases, but again, it's going into the nitty gritty with the budget and kind of understanding sort of where can we make more money, or where can we sort of cut the revenue a little bit for the sake of the students.
Why would you support further initiatives like Eat Up Australia instead of bolstering similar USU initiatives like Food Hub?
That is a great question. And look, I'd be more than happy to bolster initiatives like Food Hub. But I suppose the main motivation why I do want to work with other charitable organizations like Eat Up. I was very inspired with that story we posted on the USU the other day, and from Eat Up. And the reason being is because fundamentally, I think that going back to what we were saying about us in the current economic climate, we're living in very dire straits. Inflation has been very rampant over the last few years, although the rate has been quite subdued as of late. It's back into the target band between 2 to 3%. I believe now it's about 2.4%. I could be wrong with the exact statistic, but it's within that range, right? And so, because of that, there's a lot of people outside of the student body who are suffering right now. I mean, just have a walk in Sydney City, right? The amount of homelessness that you see, it is quite sobering, I suppose, in that regard, right? Anywhere in Sydney, right? Not just the CBD, sorry, anywhere, right? And so in that sense, we need to reach out to the wider community, and I think in doing so, it cultivates something else in the university experience. Because going to university, contrary to what a lot of people think, going to university is not just going there to maybe learn some content, get a degree, and get out, right? So then you can go get a job, make some money. There's so much, I think there's a lot more to the university experience. And I think one of them should be the cultivation of virtue, fundamentally, right? Because it contributes to you, the cultivation of you as a person, and I think engaging with those charitable organizations is good for us as well as students. Because in that sense, we are training our hearts to give something to other people, right? Whether that's our time, whether it's our funding, whether it's our effort, right? To make sure we create a better outcome and we recognize that inherent human dignity in those people who are suffering. So absolutely, I'm all for increasing funding towards Food Hub. Absolutely, we have to care for other students who are in need, right? The stereotype is that we're kind of broke, right? Students are pretty broke. I'm not saying all students are broke, and not to degrade them, but we need to provide for them. And but I also think we need to provide for the rest of the community as well that's surrounding us too.
How would you describe the powers of the USU board on the student community?
Oh, look, that's a very broad question. I suppose that, well, the power of the USU board it's quite immense because one of the main functions of it is to direct the strategic direction of the USU in general, right? So this is affecting perhaps that in general affects the way in which we direct funding. Where are we going to direct funding? Why are we going to direct funding, right? And that can have a direct impact perhaps on student well-being, perhaps what we are concerned about as students, right? And perhaps more in the short term, where we're directing funding, whether that's Food Hub, whether that's some other initiative, that can also, in the short run and perhaps in the long run as well, affect student well-being as well. So in a very general sense, I think the USU board directors does have immense ability to create an impact on student life as well.
Can you tell us why affirmative action, such as the gender equity quota measures, have been put in place?
Oh, look, from my understanding of reading the legislation that's in place for the USU, I think if I remember correctly from the document, it was either the Constitution or the other document related to the USU. The idea behind it is that if there is a vacancy in the board, then there is this during an election, let's say, there is this sort of quota in a sense that you do have to meet, in that sense. So I suppose the whole idea behind that is so you can make sure that you're representing all voices in the student body, which is fair enough. But I think in the most basic sense, that's how it's going to be enforced. In the case of, let's say, a vacancy during election.
Okay, so you want a mandate of at least one Christian on board. Are Christians specifically, what differentiates this group from other groups such as women or people with disabilities? And given the sharp decline in Australians who identify as Christian and an increase in Australians who are atheist, do you support a quota for atheist board members or support having at least one Muslim on board? Why is it Christians specifically?
Look, I do. Okay, that's a very good question. I didn't say explicitly in the policy that. Sorry, in the policy statement for a mandate for that. I think that's a bit of a misunderstanding. So just to correct you, I'm not advocating for a mandate, but rather what I'm saying is that we have plenty of people at this university who do identify with their religious faith, with their beliefs, and that includes Christians, right? Whether that's Catholics, whether that's Orthodox, whether that's evangelicals, Reformed, whoever we're talking about here. And so considering that usually universities are probably more progressive leaning, I feel like we deserve some sort of representation to get on there. I'm not saying we should have some sort of mandate. What I'm rather suggesting is for me to be a representative for them, to be a representative of their concerns, for their voice. Because inevitably, even though the USU does seem to be some sort of apolitical body, ultimately, subconsciously, people who are on the USU board may have some sort of bias. Seems like a very negative word, but really, in some cases it isn't. But some people who are on the USU board may have some inclinations, right? Some sort of ideological inclinations, and they're going to be on that board. And if they're on that board, they are going to guide the USU in a very subconscious way. Almost, those inclinations are going to guide them in a subconscious way, right? So I'm going to be a bit more explicit and say, well, okay, we need at least one person on there, someone like me, someone to represent the voices of the Christian people of this university, to hopefully balance, I suppose, the USU and make sure we are representing that group as well.
So not a mandate, but you just want
not a mandate.
More Christians on the USU board?
At least one person.
Okay.
I think it would be helpful too. I'm not saying it should be a mandate, but I think it would just be helpful too.
Well, the current president is Christian, Bryson Constable, so there is some representation there already.
Yeah, there is, and I suppose that's a good thing.
Wait, so do you support that as well for like Muslims, atheists, or is it just?
I think it will get very complicated if you were to put a mandate for Muslims, for atheists, because I think that's a bit of a
mandate for Christians either.
No, I don't think there should be a mandate. Yeah, but I just think it would be very helpful to have at least one person on there who's going to be that voice for the Christian people on campus. That's what I believe.
And then do you want as well that one person, like for the Muslim voice, or for the atheist voice, or for like other voices, like women's voices as well?
Well, look, I'm not saying that the person who's advocating for the Christian voice would neglect the concerns of other people as well, right? I think that would be very uncharitable, and it wouldn't be very helpful for representing the interests of the USU, because USU is a very diverse body. Our university has the most international students out of any university, or in Australia, sorry. But I could be wrong on that statistic. That's based on just some basic research I've done. And so, we have a very diverse range of people. We have people coming from everywhere, from China to India. I met someone from Mexico early on in the semester. And you've got people like me who's half Lebanese, half Greek, right? Yeah. Like, it's such a diverse range of people, right? And so the USU being that, you've got to represent the interests of those people, and you've got to look out for them, right? So, and fundamentally, we're all human, after all, right? Just because perhaps maybe, I don't know if you're evangelical or you're atheist or whoever you are, whatever your cultural or whatever your cultural background is, whatever your religious background is, it doesn't mean I'm going to treat you any differently in that sense, because fundamentally you are a human being, and fundamentally you have the image and likeness of God within you, and I have to respect that, right? Because you are human.
What role do you think politics has to play in the USU?
What role does politics have to play in the USU? That is a very good question. Do you mean student politics or just politics in general?
I guess in general.
In general, look, politics can be very useful, especially in terms of economic leanings and also social leanings as well. That could be very helpful in terms of, I suppose, the financial management of the USU, and also in terms of the priorities, I think. So in a very general sense, it would be the overarching priorities of the USU that would be greatly affected by politics. Wherever you stand on there, you, as I said before, right, those inclinations in your head, those ideological inclinations, that framework that you have in your head, It doesn't just have to be ideological. Again, it could also be religious as well, right? Whatever it can be. Those inclinations in your head, that's going to help guide what you think is important for the USU, right? That can be an underlying force. So it can have massive impact, in my opinion.
What is your stance on the volunteer structure of the USU, and would you support paying members of the V team?
Could you clarify on who the V team is?
Oh, the volunteer.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
it's an acronym.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
forgive me. Oh, look, I don't really have any comments on the volunteer team at the moment.
Okay, so you don't know whether they should be paid or not, just no opinion?
Look, it depends on how many hours they're working, and also the type of work they're doing as well.
Okay.
Look, depending on that, I suppose that's when we can come to a judgment as to whether we should pay them or not.
Yeah. What do you think has been the biggest achievement for the 2024 USU board? Noting that you are new, what is something major that you've noticed the USU has done for students?
Look, personally, thanks for noting that I'm actually a first year student, because I'm kind of a newcomer to all this, the USU, student politics, whatever. I'm quite a newcomer. Look, I couldn't name anything specific from the 2024 USU, but what we could notice is perhaps the Food Hub initiative. I think that's been a major change since COVID, and I think that's something that, as we said before, would be greatly beneficial for the student community.
Which USU service do you engage with most frequently?
USU service, probably Food Hub, so I can get my matcha latte. Look, I don't interact with many services aside from perhaps the USU stalls, or the USU venues around campus, whether that's Courtyard Cafe or probably more likely Fisher Cafe. Honestly, I don't really interact with many other services aside from that.
Which USU service do you think is most important to students?
I think that's really going to depend on what student we're talking about and what sort of demographic we are discussing. So that's going to be very subjective. That can be very subjective depending on the person you're talking about. Once again, going back to the example of the Food Hub, right? If it's a low-income student, that's going to be massively important to them. Perhaps for maybe a higher-income person, maybe the Food Hub, for them personally, for their own benefit, it wouldn't be as important, right? I mean, unless they get involved and it brings them a sense of fulfillment. Okay, fair enough. But in terms of what the service gives them, in terms of material benefit, I mean, that can be very subjective.
What do you think is the greatest weakness or limitation of the USU besides incorporation?
The greatest weakness? That is a very difficult question. What's the greatest weakness of the USU? I can't quite answer that question at the moment. It's very difficult.
What issue do you think students are most concerned about right now?
Once again, that is going to be a little bit subjective, because I think there can be a bit of a spectrum at the university. Perhaps some students aren't very concerned. Maybe they feel a bit indifferent to what might be going on. I understand there's been a lot of student activism at the moment over the new, as I said in the quiz, over the new definition of anti-Semitism. There's been a lot of student activism over that. Personally, I don't really have much of an opinion on that because I don't know enough about it and I don't understand fully the positions on it to kind of come to sort of an opinion on that personally. So that's my take on it. So just to sort of go back to the question, I suppose, yes, it would definitely be conflicts overseas and activism perhaps against, activism against, supposedly, I don't know if it's true or not, again, I haven't looked into the issue, but funding perhaps for weapons to Israel, whatever it is. But again, for other students, it might be the well-being of the wider community, right? Like, let's say for what my campaign is advocating for. So again, that's going to be very subjective.
We noticed that your policy statement is not as detailed or as thorough as the average policy doc. So do you plan on fleshing this out leading up to the election, or is this strategic?
I wouldn't say it's, you could say it's strategic and unintentionally because, look, I think this kind of goes back to, I suppose, the fact that I am a first year and the fact that due to that, I can't really see as many faults, I suppose, in the system. Perhaps as I go on university life here at Sydney, I'll probably notice more perhaps any other problems that we could fix at the USU. But once again, look, I've got a lot of connections across the university from different faculties and from different years, right? So I'm more than happy to consult them. I'm more than happy to receive their opinion, and I'm always open to other opinions. I think it's always very important to keep an open mind, especially with regards to policy. I know I said I didn't have an event manager, so that's probably not going to really help because it's just kind of sort of me running the election. But once again, I'm very happy to consult the community to kind of hear their opinions, what they think is important for them, and where we need to focus as a representative body for them, because we are the USU, right? And we've got to make the USU for you, right?
What's the most ambitious objective or election promise in your campaign, and how do you intend to achieve it?
That's very difficult because I feel like all of them are quite ambitious, to be honest with you, to a certain degree, right?
Yeah.
Look, the how can be very difficult because I'm not very experienced in business or finance or anything, right? But what I can say is I think that's going to rely a lot on consulting and working with other directors and what they have to maybe perhaps say on the bill that I may be proposing or on that policy. But I would also say that it goes back to that community consultation as well, and listening to those people, to the other students in the community and what they have to say. I'm sure many of them are quite knowledgeable on a lot of these issues that might be affecting them, whether that's cost of living, what have you. But perhaps on the idea to connect with more charitable initiatives and perhaps do more work with them, I think, of course, that will go down to contacting executives from them, perhaps organizing meetings with them and discussing how we can work together, what dates we can work together, and how we can put our forces together to do some good in the community.
Okay. What's your stance on the BDS movement?
BDS movement, could you recap?
So it's boycott, divest, and sanction.
Oh, is that for Palestine, I'm assuming? Okay. The boycott. Look, I'm not too sure what they advocate for. So that could you possibly outline it for me? Because in terms of Israel Palestine, I take more on a balanced sort of approach with respects to it.
Okay.
I'm not saying I'm a Zionist or anything. I'm not a Zionist because I'm Eastern Orthodox. How can I be a Zionist, right? That's a bit odd. And personally, I take more of a balanced sort of approach to the Israel-Palestine conflict. But could you possibly outline what they advocate for?
Well, it's more asking like, do you think the USU should invest and partner ethically?
So,
into the BDS?
For example,
Sure.
boycott, divest, sanction advocates for doing things like divesting from Israeli weapons companies or divesting from brands and companies that hold shares in things that fund the genocide from Gaza.
Yeah.
So, for example, do you have some talent?
Yeah,
Yes,
Talent.
but that's a more so university-focused one. Yeah, that's a good example.
Yeah.
So, for example, Talos is a weapons company the university has cooperated with before in terms of giving scholarships and also giving funding towards, and they produce weapons for use in Gaza. And so, as per BDS, you would try and boycott, divest, and sanction the university away from doing this.
Look, I understand it's a horrible humanitarian crisis in Gaza at the moment, but again, I think with respect to that sort of initiative, I think we really need to look into the specifics and what that would mean for the state of Israel as well, right? Now, again, I'm not very well informed into where the funding is going exactly and how that funding is being used. But we must also understand that the state of Israel has faced a lot of tension, a lot of conflict from the rest of the Middle East for absolutely decades, right? Whether it's from Hamas, or from really the rest of the Arab world. Let's say, for example, during the Yom Kippur War, for example, correct? Right. So look, Israel does need to defend itself, right? It does need to defend itself against terrorism or perhaps against other Arab states, and that's understandable, right? It has its right to defend itself. Every nation has. The nation has the right to defend itself. That's not to say I support the genocide that's going on in Gaza. I do want to see an immediate ceasefire. I do want to see a two-state solution whereby both states live in harmony and peace with each other and they can coexist, right? Currently, at the moment, prior to the Gazan war, there has been a pathway towards normalization of relations between Israel and some other Arab states, for example, Saudi Arabia, right? I was reading this amazing book. It's called War by Bob Woodward. And in the book, there was an interview with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and essentially what he said was, I am more than happy to normalize states' relationship with the state of Israel. But currently, well, I'm kind of paraphrasing what he's saying, but currently with this political climate, this was after the start of the Gazan war. My people don't want to do it. My people don't want to reconcile with Israel after what they're seeing in Gaza, right? So there has been this path towards normalization. I do want to see this path of normalization continued. And so in that sense, I think Israel should have its right to defend itself and continue along that diplomatic path as well. But yeah, look, honestly, in terms of the specifics of that movement, I cannot really give much of a comment on.
You're more balanced.
Balance, yes.
So do you think like people who are pro-Palestine
Yep.
are imbalanced then?
Look, once again, I think I haven't really spoken to many people on that side of the debate, right? And look, I can understand the grief and the concern, and it's very understandable. I mean, tens of thousands of people have been killed in Gaza. We haven't seen this amount of conflict in ages, right? Or at least, this scale of conflict is, frankly, quite, I suppose I have no other word to say but disgusting, right? And the scenes that you see in Gaza, it's horrid, and it is very inhumane, right? And this isn't including people who are injured, or and like the stats for people who are killed alone, it's quite staggering high. So so I understand the concern, but once again, I believe that the Palestinian people should live in peace as well as the Israeli people. Israel should have its ability to defend itself, but Palestine should not be subject to the genocide the genocide that is occurring at the moment.
Did you hear about the 2024 encampment, and what do you think about student efforts to combat or bring awareness to the genocide in Palestine?
Look, I think it's good that we're raising awareness of the genocide in Palestine. I think it's very helpful to do so, to point it out and to say, hey, we need peace right now. We need to stop this genocide. We need to move together as a people, right? The Israeli and the Palestinian people and the rest of the Arab world needs to move together, right, as a region. I think that is very helpful. My problem, though, is because once again, I'm not very well informed of who got involved in that, and what sort of opinions were mixed in that, right? I think we just need to be very careful that we don't mix in those movements other opinions which might actually jeopardize that peaceful solution in the end. Perhaps more anti-Semitic views towards Israel, right? So that's my concern. But I think it's good that we are raising awareness of the conflict that is going on in Palestine.
Did you know about the encampment that happened last year?
Look, I had a very basic understanding of it, but once again, I don't know of any extreme specific details on it.
That's okay. What is your stance on the campus access policy, and have you been involved in any action regarding the cap?
Look, I have not been really active at all, and I haven't really consulted the details of that policy, probably primarily because I haven't been active in it in the first place, so I have no comment to make.
Do you know what the cap is generally, or what it involves?
No, not that I know of, actually. What is the cap?
Oh, it's just like restricting students' freedoms to protests.
Okay.
Like, for example, you have to give 72 hours notice before you can even put a flyer up or use a megaphone before you protest.
Okay.
So it's like, it's just reducing students' freedoms, essentially.
Right. Okay. I understand your point of view.
Right. So back to kind of BDS a little bit.
Sure.
Specifically, do you think the USU itself divesting will cause significant material harm to Israel? Would you support it if the membership of the USU would like their organisation to invest in a way that aligns with their interests? The USU itself has incomes from investment of about $300K.
Look, once again, I'm not very knowledgeable of where those investments are going and how it's supposedly contributing to the genocide in Palestine. But if it is contributing to it, I think we do need to make an investigation into that. But once again, I'm not very knowledgeable on it so therefore I'm not going to take much of a stance on it. And so I think for the USU board of directors, I think it's not just a matter of listening to the people of its membership, but we also need to sort of deliberate among themselves and think, is this going to be right for the USU in the long run? What are the implications of this? And that's up for, we're not going to be like a majoritarian sort of system in the sense of we are going to simply listen to what the majority of people say. I think that can be a very flawed system of governance a lot of the time. I think, yes, we do need to listen to the people, but we also need to deliberate among them ourselves and think what is going to be the right solution to this problem that we are facing. That's sort of my take on that.
What is your stance on international student caps?
Look, I think the sort of I understand where some politicians are coming from with the pressures, I suppose, towards our rental market, towards the housing market, and the pressures associated with that. But look, I can kind of understand it because we can't exactly leave the floodgates open and let Tom, Dick, and Harry and pretty much an unlimited number of people to come into the country. But the thing is, I wouldn't have an exact stance on the number, on the cap exactly, because I don't understand the statistical implication of having a certain number of students coming into the country each year and how that's going to contribute to the rest of the economy as a whole. So I don't really have much of an exact stance on that. I'm not going to say that 500,000 is not right. We need to lift that up to 700,000, or maybe we shouldn't have a limit at all, right? So I think we need to be sustainable, I suppose, in how many people are relating to the country, that is, in terms of immigration, perhaps also international students as well. But that's only if, I suppose, it's contributing negatively towards our economic activity and how the market is sort of reacting to that.
Do you think the USU can and should take any action regarding international student caps?
Once again, that goes back to whether that cap is justified and whether it's necessary towards the well-being of the country. And again, I don't really have much of a stance exactly on that cap, so no comment.
All right, we're on to a couple of fun questions now.
Oh, fun,
So,
finally. Anyway,
if you were a frog, what colour frog would you be?
it's a very tough question, actually. Perhaps white, I think.
White?
Oh, because it's my favorite color.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And if you were a drink, what drink would you be?
Oh, that's a tough one. I'm between two, or three, actually. Water, matcha, or hot cocoa.
We're just going to get to our last three questions.
Sure, no worries, all good.
So, who are you looking forward to working with on the board?
Oh, look, I suppose anyone who sort of appreciates, I suppose anyone who appreciates the values that Christianity has contributed to this country and which has contributed to the world at large. And I suppose anyone, look, even if they're left-leaning, right? If I see that their motives are correct, if I know that they're trying to look out for the best interests of the people of the USU, I'm happy to work with them. Even if they're like far left or something, I'm happy to have conversations with them and work with them, right? They don't have to be of the same belief or ideology as me for me to work with them. So look, I'd consider myself probably more open-minded in that respect. So yeah, I think it's a very open question.
Why did you decide to run for USU board?
Wonderful question. I suppose because I think ever since high school, I've been very passionate about getting involved in leadership, right? And especially, political representation. And I suppose that's sort of contributed towards my passion towards getting into politics in the future, right? And a political career. So, and kind of what's a part of that, and that goes back to the whole idea of me being a voice for the Christian people on campus, right? Because based on the current trend at the moment in, I suppose, Australian politics, and I suppose, and perhaps we can also say university politics as well, and university bodies, is that there's, I suppose, less value put on those religious values and religious mindsets as well, right? Like, for example, Dominic Perrottet, right, the guy who, the previous Liberal Premier of New South Wales, he was criticised for having a Catholic gut, right, over his laws over gambling, right? So we're not very friendly, I suppose, to say the least, for, well, I mean, we are a relatively tolerant country compared to perhaps the CCP, but I think our country would definitely value having more representation of those values in which it was founded on, that ethos, right? And I suppose not just that, but also civilization in general, not just our civilization, but the civilization of many countries, including Greece, including Italy, including France and the United Kingdom, right? And going back to that, looking back at that tradition, and sort of advocating for that tradition in which we've trusted in, and the tradition which contains the experiences of our forefathers, I think that's so important to keep hold of, to maintain stability in our lives, spiritual or whatever other area of our life in which we're faced with. We need that tradition to help guide us, right? And that includes in the political realm too. And I think that's so important. So it's a part of my passion, and that's why I do want to run for the USU board.
And in one sentence, why should students vote for you?
Because I care about you. I think that's it, to be honest. It's, because I care about you. so technical. I've got to figure out how to get these.